Today we're going to discuss positive employee attitudes and behaviors. This corresponds to Chapter 9 in the Reggio textbook. So we're going to start out with some definitions first. Employee engagement is the worker's sort of psychological state, and that is typically described by the amount of energy that employee shows in the workplace, how enthusiastic that employee is, and how dedicated or how committed they seem to be to the work. And what's been found is the higher the more an employee is engaged in the work, the more motivated they feel, the more productive they are, and the more satisfied they are with the work. So as an employer, you want to gauge your employees' engagement in the workplace because it'll give you a sense of whether or not your employee is giving you 110% and whether or not they're really committed to the work and committed to the organization. You can increase engagement by providing support, either social support, emotional support, or professional support, and we're going to talk about these different things throughout the lecture, but basically showing your employee that you care, that you're interested and engaged in their professional growth and in them as humans goes a long way. And this kind of goes back to human factors, which we talked about a few lectures back, sort of seeing your employee as a whole person with needs and trying to meet their needs as best as possible. And if you think about this, this ties directly to the lecture before this about motivation. Finding what makes your employee tick will allow you to have a better sense of how to engage that person in the workplace. Now, of course, one rather easy and usually pretty effective way to engage an employee is via compensation. Now, that could be financial compensation, where you're giving somebody a bonus or an increased salary rate. It could be professional compensation. You can be giving them the opportunity to increase in title, or develop a skill set that they will need to further their careers. Or it could be a social compensation where they have more opportunities to take on leadership roles or to work directly with individuals that they really enjoy working with or really gain a lot from working with. And then you can also increase engagement by treating your employee fairly. And so that when the employee sees their level of productivity and their level of performance compared to others, they feel that they're getting compensated and being treated by their supervisors and managers in a positive way and in the same way as other employees. Job satisfaction is both positive and negative feelings and attitudes about one's job. And there are two sort of approaches that researchers will take when they're looking at job satisfaction. One is a global approach where they kind of look at job satisfaction as a whole construct. So are you generally satisfied with your current employer? And then there's researchers who will take a facet approach where they will question individual elements of the job and ask whether or not you're satisfied with those things. So are you satisfied with the relationships you have with your fellow coworkers? Are you satisfied with the amount of supervision you get from your manager? Are you satisfied with your salary? Are you satisfied with your benefits? Are you satisfied with the amount of work that you do? And so the facet approach allows you to kind of get a more detailed description of what makes this person feel good about the job, whereas if you take a global approach, you may miss sort of the nuances that really make up this job. And if you're a researcher doing this kind of work, you can usually get a lot of information from interviews as well as self-report measures, which we'll talk about. So what are areas that a researcher would consider when looking at job satisfaction? One is the work itself. The actual tasks and duties that you're responsible for make up a large portion of your job, right? Or if not all of it. So that's an important sort of aspect to look at. Number two is pay because, especially being in the United States, where salary is a really big reason why folks do the work that they do, being able to talk about pay as a specific area of job satisfaction is important. Number three is growth and upward mobility. So do you have opportunities to increase your title, to try new things, to go up that corporate ladder? Number four is supervision, and this is provided by managers, supervisors, and whoever else is sort of above this person's pay grade and has some control or plays some role in the employee's performance. Number five is coworkers, and so these are individuals that are at the same level as the employee. And number six is the attitude toward work. And this is sort of a general sort of feelings around, being at this organization, working with these individuals, doing the work that you do. So just in general, sort of how sort of your, feelings and dispositions around the work. So some pretty popular self-report measures include the Minnesota Satisfaction Questionnaire. It looks at 20 job categories and it's measured on a 5-item Likert scale. So what that means is, they'll ask the question, how satisfied are you with? And then they'll pick, one of these 20 areas and say, are you very dissatisfied? Are you dissatisfied? Are you neither satisfied nor dissatisfied? So in other words, are you feeling kind of neutral, like you don't really care one way or the other? Are you satisfied or are you very satisfied? So you have to sort of decide, how do you feel about this particular area of your work on the scale? And it could have a wide range. You could be very dissatisfied with, your coworkers. You may not like the people you work with, but you are very satisfied with the independence that you get in the workplace. That you're allowed to kind of do your own thing, set up your own timelines, have your own schedule. You can be sort of mildly satisfied with the supervision you get from your managers, but you could be, fairly dissatisfied, not terribly dissatisfied with the working conditions. Maybe you have a small office, that's a little bit cramped, but at least you have an office and you're not, sitting in a cubicle that, doesn't belong to you. So different things that you can sort of look at, and it's very popular because there's so many different areas that a researcher or a company can look at to see, how are we not meeting our employees' needs. The job description index, the JDI, it just looks at 5 areas, and it does a forced choice yes/no scale where you just say how, you just indicate whether or not you are satisfied with the job itself, with the supervision you receive, with the pay that you're getting currently, with the opportunities for promotions or past history of promotions, and with your fellow coworkers. And you basically get the option of saying yes, you're satisfied, no, you're not satisfied, or undecided, you're not really sure how you feel about that. So that's sort of falling somewhere in the middle where you're kind of neutral. Now, is a happy worker a productive worker? You would assume sort of instinctually that might be true, right? If you're happy at work, then you're probably really engaged and you're probably, feeling good about the work. And so that, therefore, you end up being very productive and, having high performance. Well, the truth is that there's sort of a moderate correlation. There is a positive correlation, but it's not as strong as you would assume between job satisfaction and performance. So you can be satisfied at your job, but doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have amazing performance. The Porter-Lawler law Lawler model, kind of explains this relationship. So that model says, job satisfaction and performance are not actually directly linked. So there's not a one-to-one relationship between job satisfaction and performance. The model suggests that there's a relationship associated with how employees perceive fairness in the receipt of work-related rewards. So what that means is that job satisfaction actually comes from feeling like you are getting rewarded for the hard work that you do, and the amount of work you put out is directly linked to the rewards that you receive, right? And that kind of ties back to some of the things we talked about in the motivation lecture, right? The difference here, it was not really a difference, but the thing to think about here is, if you look at job satisfaction as multifaceted, there's lots of different areas that you can be satisfied in, you can see why there's this correlation isn't as strong, because you could be very satisfied with your social relationships in the workplace, right? You can really like your coworkers. You can even really like your boss as a person, but it doesn't take away the fact that perhaps there are other areas of your job that you're not super happy with. And it really is about, what do you prioritize? What's the most important thing about this job? And that's going to really qualify, whether or not you're happy there. So if you really enjoy your coworkers, but you do feel that you're being treated unfairly by your boss, then it's going to reduce your performance because you're not feeling rewarded for the things that you are prioritizing, which is, in this scenario, perhaps how you're being treated by your boss. Motivation to complete a task is really affected by not just the reward that you expect, but also your own self-efficacy, right? So how well you think you're going to do something is going to impact how likely you are to engage in that behavior. And so that is where your motivation comes from. If you feel that you're really good at something, you're more likely to engage in it because you kind of expect to do well, right? And then by expecting to do well, you hope and often expect to be rewarded by that. Rewarding an employee can be either an intrinsic or an extrinsic process. Intrinsic means that it is giving the employee a sense of meaningfulness around the task, and a sense of autonomy around the task. So the reward itself could be just building something and seeing it all the way through, despite whatever obstacles are in the way. So, having a project where it's a complicated project, you have to work with multiple people, and you had to stay within a budget. And you'll really feel more satisfaction with that project if you happen to get through all the obstacles, manage multiple relationships well, and come under budget. That's very, that's kind of amazing. And the amazing part of that is what's going to be rewarding for you, because it shows you that you can do this task. You're actually quite good at it. And that's an intrinsic way to reward someone, by kind of showing them, look, you did this hard work and it was amazing, and look at all the great things that happened. And so it's sort of an internal sense of satisfaction. Extrinsic rewards come from, giving you something in exchange for the service that you provided. So paying you, or giving you a bonus, or increasing your job title, or the amount of people that work for you. So these are ways to kind of explicitly show you that you're doing a good job, and that you'll, from seeing this explicit reward and this external award, you will then receive satisfaction. Excuse me, everybody, I'm a little bit sick, so I apologize if I sound not great. Okay, organizational commitment. That is the employee's feelings and attitudes about the organization itself. It's also known as loyalty. And there's a great questionnaire that's used when somebody wants to assess commitment to the workplace. It's called the Organizational Commitment Questionnaire, or the OCQ. And they ask questions like the following: I'm willing to put in a great deal of effort beyond that is normally expected in order to help this organization be successful. In other words, I'm willing to give 110% because I believe in this company and I want to see this company be successful. On the other side of the spectrum, if you're not feeling terribly loyal to your company, you may answer the following question a little differently. Often I find it difficult to agree with the organization's policies on important matters relating to its employees. I disagree with policies here. I don't think they are fair or fit the employees, and so it's an area that I'm not too happy about. So that's a very different question. If you disagree with the company's policies, chances are you won't feel as committed to that company because your values and the company's values don't match. Perhaps you are someone who feels very strongly that the community should give back, or the company should give back to the community. If they're going to make millions of dollars, creating infrastructure in a city, then they should be more than willing to hire people within the community to work for them, right? And so when you see that the company's hiring, people from outside of the community, it might upset you because you think that, this is a company that's supposed to really engage with the community. It's what they're supposed to stand for, and they're not really doing that. So they're not really following, perhaps the sort of reputation that you thought they would have, right? So you disagree with the way they're approaching employment. So you may not feel as committed to them because you're just, you don't feel connected to them in that way. High positive correlation between job satisfaction and organizational commitment. So there is a very strong positive relationship between job satisfaction and organizational commitment. In other words, if you are really happy with your job, different aspects of your job, then you're very likely to engage in organizational commitment. You're very likely to be loyal to that company because, you kind of feel like the company's treating you well and they're deserving of that loyalty. Workers maintain positive attitudes towards the work to maintain cognitive consistency. What does that mean? It means that, even when things aren't looking so great, but you still want to feel very strongly about something, you're going to experience something called cognitive dissonance, where, your values or your beliefs aren't matching what you see on the outside. So when you have cognitive dissonance, it's very uncomfortable. It's a anxiety-provoking experience. So what we try to do is kind of fix the situation so that it still fits, so that it's cognitively consistent. So I think I gave this example of, what if you got a raise and your, fellow coworker Jane didn't, but you both did the same amount of work? Well, over time, as you think about it, you might start saying, well, maybe Jane wasn't deserving of that raise, and here's all the reasons why. So again, it's trying to build cognitive consistency between what you believe and what you see. So we do that in a positive way as well. Like, we will downplay some things the company does because we feel so strongly about the company and we feel so strongly about our position in the company that we're willing to overlook some things. So perhaps we see that the company, isn't giving money to charities as much as it used to, and that was something that you really valued. And so you notice over the last few years with the downturn of the economy, the company is not going out of their way to donate to charities the way it used to. But you also know that the company is making a lot of money. So even though there's an economic downturn, it hasn't affected the company, and yet the company is not putting out the way it was towards charities. So there's a little cognitive dissonance there where that there's a fact that they're making money, and the other fact is that they're not giving away as much money as they used to. And that's something that you believe in. Well, you'll think about it and say, well, perhaps that money is coming back into the company. We just had some renovations done to our floor. That must have been very expensive. So sure, they're not giving money out to charities, but they are making our living situation, our workplace, a better quality of life within the workplace. So you kind of justify why the company isn't putting out money towards charities, even though you know that they could. And so you'll try to come up with reasons why that is so that you have cognitive consistency. Excuse me. Commitment to the workplace and satisfaction are usually affected by the kind of job you have, how much variety you get to have in the workplace, the amount of responsibility you have, the kinds of social relationships you have at work, how much you get paid, and how many opportunities you have for professional growth or for promotions. So all these things play a role because they really add to the spice of the job, right? So if you have a job that has lots of different roles and responsibilities, it's more interesting. If you get to work with a lot of different people that you enjoy, it's just a more enjoyable workplace. All these things are going to increase job satisfaction. And as we've already discussed, it will also increase commitment to the job. As an organization, if you are the employer, you want to think about how you can align your company's values to your employees. And this goes back all the way back to job analysis. So in job analysis, we talked about, finding the right qualified candidate to fit the job. Well, here's another area where you want to make sure there's a good fit. How you value time and money and discipline and competitiveness and intellectual abilities and creativity. You want to bring in employees who have that same value set. Otherwise a misalignment can cause lower commitment to the work, which will then affect the satisfaction with the workplace, which will also affect performance, which ultimately affects your bottom line as a company. There's also a positive correlation or positive relationship between commitment and age, education, and company tenure, how long someone has been with the company, which is interesting. So the longer someone's been with the company, the more committed they probably are, or at least they believe they are. The older they are, the more likely they are to be committed to the workplace. And the higher level of education they have, the more likely they are to have stronger commitment to the workplace. Now, if you think about each one of those, it kind of makes sense. If you've been with the company long enough, you, by default, you haven't left, right? So that means that there must be something that's keeping you. So whether it's satisfaction with the work itself or just, settling for the fact that this job is something that's familiar and you've done it a long time and you've worked with the same people for a long time, your commitment can come from just an environment that's comfortable rather than an environment that's actually deeply satisfying. So that kind of explains the relationship between commitment and company tenure. It's been known that older employees are a little bit more likely to follow rules, go along with the majority. They're not as likely to fight back. They're not as likely to get as frustrated over changes and things that happen. And it's mostly because they've been in the industry longer. So they kind of see how things are, and they may also understand that some things are just kind of the status quo, that some things won't change, that management will make decisions without considering them, or pay raises only come every other year at this company, or whatever the case may be, and they may not feel the need to jump ship as quickly as a younger employee. A younger employee with less experience might be a little bit more rebellious, more likely to seek out other opportunities. They won't have gotten, they won't have felt that there is no way to change things. They're more likely to engage in change or wanting to make change. And when they don't see change happen, they're more likely to leave a company. And then the other thing is with younger employees, we're sort of in this job market now where people aren't rewarded for being at a company for very long. It used to be that you would get a pension or some sort of guaranteed retirement if you were, and it was very common for people to stay with a company for 20, 30, 40 years. Nowadays, it's very unusual to see that. Most companies don't commit to having employees for that long, and they don't have the same value. Older employees don't have the same value. So we're also coming into sort of an age of a lot of turnover in companies, simply because companies don't do what they used to do for their employees. Employees know that, and they're willing to jump ship faster. And then lastly, the relationship between commitment and education. Once you have advanced degrees, first of all, it took you a long time to get there. If you've gone through college and then through graduate school or other professional schooling, and then you finally got that degree and then you got licensed, by the time you enter the job market, you're kind of tired of doing, of jumping through hoops. So when you find a position, typically you find a position in an area that is niche. It's a smaller pool of applicants, and so it's much more selective. And so if you get picked, it's great. And that you've kind of beat out other people, so you're not really in the market where you could easily switch jobs, but you're also at that point probably in a lot of debt. So, you're less likely to want to leave work because at that point, you have to sort of build out your life, being able to pay your student debt back, being able to buy a home, etc. Um, and get married and all those other things, that kind of come after you finish all your schooling. So you're less likely to want to move around. So higher education, you tend to see more commitment because there's a lot more at stake at that point. And there's a lot more fatigue at that point. Like, once you've been through school for, college, let's say hypothetically medical school, and then residency, you have possibly 12 to 16 years of education under your belt. You're just kind of over working so hard and you just want a job where you get to do what you have been trained to do, and you're going to stick it out in this particular place for as long as you can, or as long as you want to, or as long as they want you. So that's another kind of understandable reason why there's that relationship. Going back to age, the last point I wanted to make was, as employees get older, they also have other financial responsibilities, which might tie them back to the job. So, if you're looking at a 20-something-year-old versus a 40-something-year-old, the 40-something-year-old probably has a family, has, a mortgage, has a car payment. So all of those things lead them to need that job a lot more than the 20-something-year-old who is relatively independent with possibly very minimal financial responsibilities. So that's another reason why you might see that relationship change as people get older. So there's two types of employee attendance. One is voluntary absenteeism, where employees miss work because they want to go do something else, or they need to go take care of something else, and it's not because they're unable to work or because they're sick. So they're voluntarily not showing up for work. And that's when, you take the day off to go run errands, or you take the day off just because you don't feel like going into the office that day. That's voluntary absenteeism. Involuntary absenteeism is when an employee has a legitimate reason to miss work. Typically it's illness, or it could be an injury, something that prevents them from being able to perform their job. Legitimate illnesses do account for most employee absences, and companies don't want to don't want to hinder an employee's decision to not come into work because they're sick. So they offer sick leave, they offer vacation time, they offer what's known as PTO, or paid time off. And depending on how much time off somebody needs, they may also offer the option of unpaid leave. And there's several reasons for this. One is, if you're sick, you shouldn't really be going into work because A, you won't be productive because you don't feel well, but two, you might also be spreading germs. So a company kind of needs to give you the incentive to stay home. And the way to incentivize that is to say, well, don't come in. We will still pay you, but stay home and get better and then come back when you're feeling better. So that's where sick days kind of play a role. And, employers give vacation time because it's an opportunity for you to sort of refresh, decompress, go out and have a good time with your family and your friends, and then come back to us and, when you're in a better state of mind and you're feeling good. And so most companies, not all companies, but most companies will provide some sort of paid time off. In some places, the PTO consists of both vacation and sick leave. And in some places, they differentiate vacation time from sick leave. And if you take sick leave, you need to show proof that you were actually sick so that you can get those hours paid. There's federal laws around workers' compensation, and then states also have rules around workers' comp. And the workers' comp covers all sorts of fees and kind of billing associated with on-the-job illnesses or injuries. So one note I want to make about that is, if you ever get injured at work, even something silly like, you slipped and fell and you got up and you feel fine and you're totally fine and nothing, you don't feel like you hurt yourself, go ahead and get yourself checked out at Employee Health Services if your company has some sort of Employee Health Services office, and immediately report it to your supervisor. Because, if you don't report it, it's like nothing happened. And what if you slipped and fell and you felt fine, but then 2 days later you end up feeling like you have, pain in your hip? And it turns out that you actually injured yourself, but in the moment didn't feel it because the adrenaline was rushing and the endorphins were going and you couldn't believe it just happened to you, and then you walked it off and you're fine, but it turns out you actually did injure yourself. If you don't report it in real time, then it's very difficult for you to get the company to pay for any kind of medical bills that follow that. Like what if you end up needing x-rays, or you end up needing physical therapy? Like all of those things should be covered by the workplace because that's where the injury occurred. But if you didn't report it, or if you report it way after it happens, the company then can say, well, we don't know if that's true. No one saw it, and it wasn't documented. So if it's not documented, it could be like it never happened. So I would say in any moment, if you ever get injured in the workplace, or if you get sick because of something, some exposure to something in the workplace, immediately notify your supervisor and then follow whatever the standard operating procedure is to document this injury or this illness, and then follow through with whatever the guideline is. Whether it's that you go to employee health services or you go to your doctor and have documentation brought back to the workplace, whatever the case is, follow through and do it, even if it's something minor, because you don't know that it could turn into something bigger, and you want to make sure that if it was associated with the job, that you get compensated accordingly. So workers' comp also covers extended time off. So like, let's say you got injured to the point where you couldn't really perform your job anymore, but this was something that happened to you because of work or because of the work setting, then workers' comp will kick in and your unpaid leave now becomes paid leave. There's obviously some paperwork and a lot of other things that need to happen, but if you can make that association that what happened to you was directly related to work, then the company kind of has to step in and take care of you, because that's what the state and federal laws require. So again, ever have an injury in the workplace, report it, and then go through whatever the protocol is to make sure that they are aware of the injury. Increased voluntary absenteeism could be an indicator of turnover. So when someone starts taking a lot of time off randomly throughout the year, one can assume that perhaps they are either really dissatisfied with their job and they just need a time out, or they might be looking for a new job, because you take time off to go on interviews, or to pursue other options, or to possibly even have another job on the side. So if a company notices a lot of voluntary absenteeism that isn't being qualified by an illness or an injury, companies can get a little savvy about it and realize, well, this person might actually have one foot out the door. So companies sometimes will do assessments. I don't know how regularly. I have never heard of a company doing this regularly, but I know of companies that have done it, where they will look at rates of time taken, paid time off, and then they kind of get a sense of if it's very frequent and fairly consistent, then it's likely that this person's leaving. So employee turnover can be very expensive, actually, and employees. So turnover means having a shorter average tenure than people in other companies. So a company that's having a lot of turnover means that they're having sort of a rolling door experience of people coming in as new hires and then leaving shortly after, and then having to rehire for positions constantly, or they have massive groups of people just leaving all at the same time, and not because they're all getting laid off, but because they've all left. High turnover is usually a pretty good indicator of low job satisfaction and low organizational commitment. People don't want to be there, and so they're going to be there for as long as they have to be there, and then the moment they can find something else that's better for them, they take off. And a company that doesn't have a lot to incentivize the employee will end up with a lot of turnover. Involuntary turnover is that the employee is fired or laid off, and those are two different things. When you're laid off, it's typically the company wants to keep you but can't. Maybe they can't pay you, or they can't keep the position open, and so you're typically entitled to some sort of severance package where they will offer you some sort of monetary mea culpa for having to let you go. So they might offer you 2 weeks salary or a month's salary, or depending how long you've been there might be a rule around how much salary they can offer you as part of your exit package. Now if you're fired, it's different. The company doesn't want you and they have let you go, and at that point you're not necessarily deserving of a severance, so you could just be fired and you don't get anything else. And when you're fired, it's a little tricky too, because in the United States you can file for unemployment, but if you have been fired, unemployment gets a little trickier. If you've been laid off, unemployment will kick in a little easier, because they realize that it's not your fault that you're not working. So the whole point of unemployment is to help you out financially when you're, when you've lost a job and you're trying to get a new job, and it's not your fault that you lost your job originally. So they're much more happy to give you unemployment. When you're fired, it's like kind of your fault for losing your job. So unemployment doesn't really want to help you out as much. So you might end up finding some difficulties around unemployment based on the fact that you were fired and not laid off. Voluntary turnover is when you choose to leave the work. You choose to leave this company perhaps for another position elsewhere, or to do something different, or to take time off. Turnover rates between 2001 and 2008 was about 3.3% per month, which is pretty low. Annually, it was almost 40% between those 7 years. 22% of turnover tends to happen in the first 45 days of employment. So this goes back to that probation period I was telling you about. It's a lot easier to let somebody go when they are still under probation because you don't really need to prove via documentation why this person no longer belongs there. Once they pass their probation period, most companies have a lot of other hurdles in place before you can really fire someone. And that's really to avoid, letting people go for unfair reasons. And it's kind of a protective thing where like you reduce liability by having lots of documentation for why this person was fired. Because, anybody can turn around and say, well, I was harassed or I was treated unfairly, and then they can turn around and sue the company. So the company needs to have really solid documentation for why they let you go. But within the probation period, which runs anywhere between 30 to 90 days, depending on the company, you can just be let go. So it makes sense that turnover happens, within the first month and a half of work. And on the other side of that, employees, you may take a job because you have to have a job. And so, this company finally, a company finally said, yes, we'll take you. So you're like, thank you. But it may not be exactly what you want to do. You're not that excited about the work. Maybe you're overqualified for the job, but you're going to take it because it's a job. In the meantime, you might continue looking. So you're still looking for a new job, even though you have a job, unless it's a job you want. So there's a strong possibility that if you're continuing to look, you might find something else, and that is the reason you leave. So turnover could happen because you found something better, within 45 days of starting a new job. 46% of new employees don't make it past the first 18 months of a new job. That's pretty high. That's almost half. And that statistic was from last year. It is an employer's market right now. So there is a saturation of potential employees. So employers can really, get very picky about who they want and then really not consider the loss if they need to let somebody go because it's very easy to pick up a new employee. So that's, I think, a pretty interesting and significant statistic if you think about the fact that, the U.S. is recovering from a pretty bad economic situation, and so we haven't fully recovered, and it's still an employer's market. Now, with that said, the cost of losing an employee in the first year is approximately 3 times that employee's salary. So it's expensive to lose an employee, and we're going to talk more about that in the next lecture about worker stress. So negative employee attitudes and behaviors. We'll spend some more time talking about the expense of employee turnover. So how do we increase job satisfaction in the workplace? What can we do to make employees feel more connected and engaged with the work and more committed to the job? Well, one thing we can do as employers is change the job structure to fit the employee. We can do things like job rotation, where we systematically move employees from one task to another. We talked about this already, I think, in the job training and development lecture. So you basically can cross-train employees in different areas, allow them to learn new skill sets and experience new work environments. It reduces boredom, and it makes them more valuable because if you have them trained in different areas, then they can work in all these different areas, and they might find satisfaction in one area more than another, and it may not have been an area that they even considered. It was just because they got rotated into that department that they realized that they might have a special skill set or talent they didn't really recognize before. So job rotation is a great way to really expand an employee's opportunities to try out new things, to experiment with new skill sets, and to learn more things. Job enlargement is expanding the role that a person has in a particular job. So giving them more responsibilities or more or different types of tasks, just making the job bigger and more interesting. Now, if you think about it, you're technically making the employee work more, but that's not the way the employee would experience it. They would experience it as, oh, you're giving me more responsibilities. You must trust me, so I must be doing a good job, so this must be really good for me. But in reality, you're just making them do more work. So, it is sort of a little bit twisted the way it kind of works out, but everybody wins if the employee likes what they do and is up for the challenge, right? So you get an employee who's interested and engaged and committed, and they're getting tons of experience, and hopefully it's a relationship where everybody feels like they're being treated equally, and the employee doesn't look at it as, oh, you're just giving me more work to do. Job enrichment is increasing the level of responsibility in any given task. So giving an employee more autonomy, more control over what they're doing, when they do it, how they do it, how they plan it, how they're going to execute it, and how they're going to evaluate themselves, kind of giving them more power within the work that they are responsible for. You can also change the pay structure. You don't have to necessarily just pay someone a flat rate for a 9-to-5 schedule. You could base your pay on skills. So in a lot of industries, this is what they do. They will pay you based on the number of skills or the type of skills that you have. If you have very specific skills that not a lot of people have, you have more value. because you're not as easily replaceable. So in this scenario, skill-based pay really makes sense because you are getting paid for the things that you can do that no one else can do. There might also be merit pay where you get a base rate and then you get additional pay based on performance. So a great example of this is bonuses that people get when they make sales. That's merit pay. You get a flat salary, but then you make a bonus for every, product that you sell or every, client that you bring into the firm, for example. Gain sharing is where you get compensated based on the performance of the group. So let's say you are a marketing agency and your job is to, find clients that need advertising, for products that they sell. So every time you bring in a new client, you as a group, as your marketing group, everybody shares in the profits from bringing in that client. So closing whatever that deal is, everybody gets a piece of that. Profit sharing is where all of the employees in an organization get a small chunk of the organization's profits. So this is what you see in banks. Large banks, when they make millions in profits, they actually share it with all of their employees. So all of their employees get a percentage, and depending how high up they are in the food chain, they may get a larger percentage or a smaller percentage of the profit. So this is where you sometimes will hear, bankers, like I'm trying to think of a particular area. So there's in large banks, there's portfolio managers, and they handle the portfolios of large companies, right? So let's say hypothetically Goldman Sachs. So Goldman Sachs at the end of the year will make millions of dollars, right? And a portfolio manager, depending on the number of portfolios and the value of those portfolios, will get a significant chunk of bonus at the end of the year based on their sales and based on the profit that the entire company made. So let's say it's a portfolio manager who runs 5 portfolios, but each one of them is worth $1 million. $1 million worth of investments for each one of these portfolios. So they might get 5% or something, because it's a 1% for every million that they make. For every $1 million portfolio they have, not the $1 million they make for the company, but the $1 million portfolio. So the company, Goldman Sachs, really values this guy because he by himself manages $5 million worth of investments, which is a lot of money. So in order to compensate him, he may not get, any kind of bonus based on how each portfolio does throughout the year, because it's, very variable. It's based on the market. It's based on what kinds of stocks and bonds each portfolio has, and blah, blah, blah. So that might be very complicated. But the way that Goldman Sachs will pay this guy in terms of the bonuses, well, as a company, we made, $50 billion. So you get a percentage of that 50 million. And this is how you end up with bankers who have these bonuses that are more than what their base salary was. They'll make $50,000, and you're like, how did you make a $50,000 bonus? It's because they have a profit sharing system where the company did so well and they're valued pretty highly, so they get a nice percentage of the profit. You can also increase job satisfaction by changing the work schedule and making it more flexible. One way to do this is to create the compressed work week, where you decrease the number of days somebody works by increasing the hours they work per day. So let's say Mary really doesn't want to come into work on Fridays. She would really prefer to have Fridays off so that she has a 3-day weekend. Okay, no problem, but Mary still needs to finish 40 hours worth of work. So what might be done is that instead of doing 5 8-hour days, she'll do 4 10-hour days. So her days will just be extended by 2 hours. She has to come in 1 hour earlier than everybody else and leave 1 hour later than everybody else. At the end of the day, she's still doing 40 hours, but she's compressing it down to 4 days instead of 5. The other way that you can also change the work schedule to make it more flexible is via something called flex time, where it doesn't matter when the person works as long as they complete the tasks. So the schedule will, be according to the employee's, interests or, their preferences, but they'll work a specified number of hours and they can spread it out whenever they want, however long they want. So this is where, you would, if this is the kind of schedule you want to have, so then maybe you'll have 4 hours on Mondays and then 8 hours on Tuesday and then 10 hours on Wednesday, and then you don't work on Thursday, but then you put in a 12-hour day on Friday, and then you work some hours through the weekend. So you're always working because you're still completing the number of hours you need, but you're spreading it out to the way that's most convenient to you. So what's been interesting is that we're seeing a lot more flex time with people who work remotely. So these are individuals who work from home. So they don't have to come into the office, they just really need to get tasks done. The problem with working from home is you can, you work whenever you want. So you end up first thing in the morning, maybe you're not a morning person, so you like get up and maybe you like watch TV and then you like read the news and then you make yourself breakfast. So by the time you roll into quote unquote work, it's noon, right? So you finally sit down to get some work done, it's noon, but then like around 2 o'clock, you're hungry, so you step away from your desk to go have lunch, and then maybe you make a phone call, and then you roll back into your desk at like 3:30. And in the grand scheme of things, you maybe have done like 2 hours worth of work. But maybe you have something due the next day, that has a hard deadline, even though you don't have a hard work schedule, you have a hard deadline. So you end up realizing that you didn't really put in as much time during the day as you had hoped or you had thought you would. So you end up working through the night to finish this project that's still due the next day. So flex time is great, but you need to have a lot of discipline around scheduling yourself and scheduling your work time so that you don't end up working really odd hours or overworking, because it's very easy to always be working when you're working from home. Like, you could be doing it in the middle of the night, you can do it first thing in the morning, you could be checking your work mail all the time. Whereas if you're physically going to the workplace, it forces you to actually do work while you're there because you're in the office. And at some point you want to leave your office, so it kind of motivates you to get stuff done. But when you're not in an actual physical location, the day kind of opens up and you end up with a lot of distractors. So flex time can be great, but it does require that the individual with flex time to have a lot of time management skills and discipline to get work done. Most companies offer a few if not many benefits, and that's the most common way for employers to increase job satisfaction and commitment, especially in the U.S., where things like health insurance and other healthcare options are very expensive. So because of this, many of us do take jobs that just offer really good benefits because that's important to us, especially when you have dependents like children or, you're a caretaker to someone who needs additional medical services. It really can make you, that can end up being a big reason to stay at a job, even if it's a job you don't love, but they cover a lot of your healthcare costs. You're going to stick it out. So health insurance, dental insurance, vision benefits. There may be opportunities for you to, get medical assistance for your dependents, like your elderly parents or your kids or your grandkids. There may be opportunities for you to share your benefits with your husband or your wife if they are at a job with terrible health insurance options or no health insurance options. Some companies also offer career development opportunities, so like tuition reimbursement. For people who want to expand their skill set. Typically that comes with the caveat if you're going to go and get yourself an advanced degree and the company's going to pay for it, they may require you to stay with the company longer to kind of sort of pay your debt, so to speak. They can't ask you for the money for the tuition that they paid, but they're going to ask you for the work. So they will ask you to make a commitment to stay with the company another 2 or 3 years. There's lots of health promotion programs. We're going to spend some time talking about this in the next lecture about wellness. There's a big push for preventative medicine these days, so companies are offering, corporate discounts for gym memberships or for Weight Watchers or for, equipment. There's, some companies do Wellness Day where they'll offer free blood pressure checks and, diabetes information sessions, or they offer, discounts for vitamins or medications. So they offer things to promote healthy living, smoking cessation classes, meditation, yoga. Some companies are offering yoga at work where they set aside an hour a day where they hire a yoga instructor and they just hold a session for whoever wants to go. There's also deferred compensation plans, DCPs, for retirement. So this is where you can set aside a chunk of your weekly or bi-weekly paycheck, take that money out and put it into a retirement plan. And it could be a Roth IRA is a government plan. The 401k is most private companies' retirement plan, and the 403b is most healthcare services plans. So hospitals have a 403b. It's the same as a 401k. It's just, I don't know, different lingo for health services. And all of these plans, the idea is that you start saving for retirement because we can't depend on Social Security for retirement because there's just not enough money in Social Security. And by the time we're all old enough to retire, Social Security may not exist. So a lot of companies are sort of like saying, hey, you need to start thinking about retirement. You don't want to work forever. We're going to make it a little easier. Whatever amount you tell us, we'll take it out of your paycheck and put it in this other account that will collect interest. And some companies will even match you, like as an incentive to do it. So let's say you're putting $1,000 a month towards retirement. They'll say, well, we'll also give you $1,000 of free money because you work for us. We'll match your $1,000 and put that in the account too. So throughout the year, you're saving $12,000 from your own salary, but then you're also getting an additional $12,000 from the company that's going towards this interest accruing account. This is something worth thinking about and worth doing early because it's kind of like money that you won't miss. If you already get it pulled out of your paycheck, you don't even consider it. And it is money that you're going to need in the future because, again, unlikely that the government's going to be able to take care of you when you retire, and you don't know what other financial situations you might be in the future. There's also commuter tax benefits where you can take out money from your paycheck before they take out taxes. So out of your gross income, they'll pull out however much you want, and that goes into an account, and then you can use that account to pay off transportation costs like the Metro card or your train tickets to LIRR or Metro North or your Easy Pass. Um, However you commute, you can take money out of your paycheck before you pay taxes and put that money towards those costs that are typically consistent costs that you're going to have every month. Um, it allows you to reduce your local, state, and federal income taxes because you get taxed on a different amount of money, right? So let's say you're spending $200 a month on the Metro card and a bus ticket. So if you take that money out, then you're going to get taxed on whatever is left in your paycheck. So it's going to be a little less because you took $200 out, so your income tax will be a little lower too. So it's very beneficial to consider all of your pre-tax options, especially for things that are consistent expenses that you're going to have. And commuting is, in New York City especially, is a fairly consistent and often expensive expense. So why not, take advantage of these opportunities to help yourself out? You're still paying for your Metro card or whatever, but at least you're not going to pay taxes on that, and that's pretty useful. Some companies are now offering on-site childcare services because they know that women, especially, they leave the workplace to have their kid, and then it becomes a huge expense to the family for daycare services. So as a way to incentivize families, employees with families to stay with the company is to offer them services like childcare. So having a daycare within the institution or near the institution that you work in is a huge benefit, and it's unusual. It's becoming a little bit more. People are starting to do more of that. Large companies are, but it's still relatively rare. But this by itself can increase job satisfaction significantly because, again, childcare in the United States is a huge expense unless you have parents who can help you or you have family members who can support you through this. You typically will have to go and find yourself either a place to drop off your kid or bring someone into the home, and that can be very expensive. So cutting that cost, for some people, it's very important, and it's valuable enough to stick around with the company just because that's a major part of the benefits package. Interestingly enough, while childcare programs are great and can increase job satisfaction, it doesn't really have a lot of effect on employee absenteeism. Now, if you think about, involuntary absenteeism, you can have childcare services, and that actually could be a source of your kid getting sick, right? So you can drop the kid off at daycare, and he or she goes to daycare with a bunch of other kids who also get sick. And so your son or daughter gets sick, and then you get sick. So it has an impact on employee absenteeism that may not have been the case if the child was just at home, without being exposed to germs. So, there's a give and take here. But in the grand scheme of things, having childcare services as an option is awesome. Organizational citizenship behaviors are behaviors that are positive, and they typically advance or promote work organizations and the work organization's goals. So the interesting thing about OCBs, organizational citizenship behaviors, is that they're not part of the job description. They're typically performed by the employee by personal choice, and it's usually because people are naturally inclined to behave this way. And if they like where they work, they're more inclined to engage in those behaviors. OCBs are positively associated with both job satisfaction and organizational commitment, and it makes sense. And we're going to go through a list of what these OCBs are. But if you're engaged in behaviors that promote the company and the company's goals, then chances are you're committed to the work, right? You really enjoy the work, hopefully, and you're committed to the vision of the company. And so engaging in these behaviors just naturally flows in the direction of increased job satisfaction. MBA programs, Masters of Business Administration programs, are now engaging a lot in teaching emotional intelligence. And we're going to speak about emotional intelligence very briefly in the communications lecture. And it's mostly about being able to read an individual's sort of emotional experience. So sort of being able to kind of see when somebody's upset or when someone's feeling happy or someone's feeling sad, and kind of, experiencing that with them, being empathetic to that or being sympathetic to it, and sort of supporting that person through that experience. And high levels of emotional intelligence allows us to connect to others really well. So in MBA programs, they see this as an important part of leadership, because as a leader, you should be able to kind of emotionally connect to your followers or to your employees. So this is something that a lot of MBA programs spend a lot of time and money teaching and sort of skills training their MBA candidates, because they think that if you can emotionally connect to your fellow employees, that'll add to how they view you and how they view your support, and that'll increase productivity. So types of OCBs. There's helping behaviors where you voluntarily help others, you manage conflicts, you avoid conflicts, you are just someone who engages in behaviors that's going to be helpful to others. And you do it without being asked, which is really the important thing about OCBs, is that you're not being asked to do any of these things. You're just naturally engaging in these behaviors. Sportsmanship is your cheerleader, the person who has a positive attitude, who wants everyone to engage, and even when things are bad, they're like, no, we can do this, guys, we're a team. They tolerate inconveniences. They may even sacrifice personal interests for the sake of the group. They're willing to stay late, just to get the job done, because it's important for them to get it done. It's important, they have a high value system around getting things done, and so they're your sportsman, they're your cheerleader. Organizational loyalty is, engaging in behaviors that defend and promote the organization to outsiders. So if you're, hanging out with a group socially and somebody says something about the company you work for, you immediately get offended and you defend your company and say, well, that's not true. You can't believe everything you see in the media. The company actually, I work with great people, and, we have strong values. And so you immediately feel the need to support and defend your company outside of, the company itself. Organizational compliance is that you engage in behaviors that show that you accept and adhere to the rules or regulations, formal or informal rules in the company. So, you kind of go with the flow. That's sort of your attitude, and that makes you an easier employee to work with, and hopefully you see the reward in playing by the rules. Individual initiative is sort of taking the initiative to take on new duties, to learn new tasks, to take on new responsibilities, to learn new behaviors. You have the individual initiative to try new things without being asked. You volunteer yourself to take on extra shifts, or to increase your role in a particular arena, or you see the opportunity to, I don't know, try something new, and you ask to do it rather than be told to do it. That's individual initiative. Civic virtue, there's some employees who will engage in what's known as organizational governance. So they're the ones who typically know the rules really well and the policies, and they follow those policies really well, and they adhere to those policies, and they advocate for those policies. And so they tend to engage in sort of taking care of, of sort of supervising that other employees are also following the rules. Or they may take on roles that are not as formal. So, when you have an office where there's one person who tends to be the one who organizes social events, that's sort of their thing. And so that's a civic virtue, that they go out of their way to plan social events for their fellow coworkers. Self-development is voluntarily upgrading one's knowledge or skills. So taking opportunities to take classes, or seminars, or go to workshops, or go to talks, and nobody tells them to. They want to learn new things. They want to share that information with the rest of the team. They are engaging in self-development. It's usually a win-win, because not only as an employee are you gaining new knowledge or skills, you're also disseminating that to the group, which can be very beneficial to everyone. So why do OCBs work? Well, when someone engages in these positive behaviors, they tend to be easygoing, fun people to be around, because they typically have a positive attitude. They're really committed to the work. They seem to love what they do. And so that kind of brings positive energy into the workplace. They tend to be more cooperative. And so they're less likely to engage in conflict. They're less likely to argue with others. They're more likely to want harmony. They tend to be more cooperative and friendly. New employees will really flock to these types of employees, because they feel like that those employees are trustworthy. And if you're engaging in helping behaviors, you're likely to take a new employee under your wing and teach them things, and supervise them, and mentor them, and socialize them to how this place works. So new employees catch up and become productive faster because of the employees that help them out, the older employees that help them out. Typically, employees who engage in OCBs are also social. People get along with them, and so they may also be sort of someone that everyone's friends with, work friends with, and that could lead to better communication amongst employees. People are more likely to reciprocate. If I need help getting something done, I'm more likely to ask you, because I know you're helpful, because you like to, you seem to really flourish when someone needs help, so I'm more likely to go to you and say, hey, like I need to take care of this. Would you be, willing to stick around for an extra hour after work? You're more willing to say yes. And then on the flip side, I know that I kind of owe you, right? So in the future, if you need someone to cover you, I'm more likely to cover you because you covered me at one point. And then employees who are willing to learn new skills just become better assets in the workplace. They know more information. They're good to have around, and so companies really like to have employees who are motivated and engaged and interested and willing to take on new responsibilities and to learn. Companies can't lose with those kinds of individuals, so they might work harder to keep those individuals, and that might mean paying them more, but it could also just mean rewarding them intrinsically for the work that they do. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is positive affect, and so this is just sort of the emotional state individuals are in the workplace and how that affects the people around them. So there's a difference between mood and affect. Your mood is more like the weather. So today you can be feeling, kind of low, not great. You're tired, you're sort of irritable, you're a little frustrated, maybe you had a rough night, you didn't sleep well. So you roll into work and you're just like feeling kind of crabby. And so your mood is kind of, not great. So if we want to think about that in terms of weather, maybe you're feeling cloudy with a chance of rain. You're not feeling fantastic. You're feeling kind of low, maybe a little depressed, not good, and tired on top of that. So you're a little cloudy with a chance of rain. Affect is more like the climate. And so the climate is like the general weather in a region, right? So your affect as a person is sort of your general disposition, emotional disposition that you typically have most of the time, right? So if you tend to have a positive affect, if you tend to be mostly sunny, then of course you're entitled to have bad days where you don't feel great, but generally you're a nice person to be around because you typically are optimistic and friendly and personable and approachable. Now we all know, we have at least all encountered one person who's got sort of what's known as a negative affect, which is kind of like this sort of just irritable, like cranky, like they always seem kind of cranky and very serious, and they don't really crack a smile very much, and they don't really take jokes well, and they just seem very brooding and not very approachable, maybe a little hostile. And so someone with that kind of affect is hard to work with because you just don't know if you're upsetting them or if they're just generally upset. You don't know how to approach them. You don't know how to talk to them. So that kind of affect can be very difficult to work around. And obviously for reasons that should be fairly straightforward, you'd rather work with the person who's got positive affect, who's mostly sunny, not mostly cloudy or mostly, thunderstorming. So how you kind of come into the workplace emotionally really impacts job satisfaction, not just for yourself, but for the people around you, because there's something known as emotional contagion, where one person's sort of emotional state spreads to everybody else. Like especially when you're in a small office, if you have a small office and one person comes in really crabby, everyone's impacted by this. Like, what's her problem? Why is she upset? Why is she yelling at me? And then that person gets mad, and then the other person gets mad because they're mad, and so it spreads out like a virus. So you have to kind of keep yourself in check when you're not in a good mood. It's important for you to recognize that actually has an impact on everybody else around you. Dispositional affect, just like I was saying before, is sort of how you tend to kind of emotionally respond to things, and it's typically fairly stable and fairly predictable. So again, if you always seem like a really sunny, friendly, outgoing, optimistic person, that's how you tend to respond to things. It was a strong indicator that you have higher job satisfaction or performance. Like if you're generally in a good mood at work, it means that something about work must be going well. Or hopefully, even if you're not in a great mood, but you can sort of pull off a sunny disposition, then there's something about work that might be satisfying. And ultimately, you're experiencing some commitment to the work, despite how you might be feeling internally. Like maybe you're having a really hard day, but you don't really want to show anyone. It's because it's important to you to seem like you're having a good day, or, it's important to you to perform despite not feeling well, despite feeling kind of sad and frustrated, you're still committed to getting the work done, to being able to leave on time, etc. So, you're willing to kind of put your emotional state aside to get stuff done. So dispositional affect is linked to higher job satisfaction, to increased performance, and it's also linked to lower absenteeism and lower turnover. Also, emotionally positive employees, who are, again, mostly sunny, they're more likely to engage in OCBs. And because of that, they're probably more approachable. They probably get some more satisfaction out of being around others. They tend to be more social anyway. So there's a lot of good things that come from positively affected people in the workplace. And if you tend to be someone who's usually sunny and you find yourself coming into work every day, you're in a really bad mood and like really cranky and frustrated, and that's not how you typically are, that's where you have to start thinking about whether or not you really want to be at this job. And maybe there's something going on there that is showing you that you have significantly lower job satisfaction. Maybe it's time for you to move on to something else. The next lecture, we're going to talk about stress and the impact of stress in the workplace. And we're going to talk about how expensive it is and the things that we can do to sort of combat it. But if you do find yourself in a work situation where you're constantly kind of just pissed off, consider that some of it is probably associated with work stress. And we'll spend some time discussing that next time.